Let's get ready to RPG!
RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG!
Dungeons and Dragons. Satan's Game.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a late Tuesday night. As I said, this week might be a little bit strange and weird with the scheduling. Was going to talk about Stone Top, but that actually may end up being tomorrow or Thursday. I don't know. It's going to be a weird night. It's funny. I kind of like felt bad because I was like, oh man, I didn't stream, and then I was like, yeah, but I posted like a 3-hour actual play on Monday, and then I still streamed for like 2 hours. So I already created more content in a single day than most people do in a month. But hey, whatever. We're here. And we're here to continue the adventures, the misadventures in randomly generated dungeons. Except now we're not going to be randomly generated, okay? So if you missed yesterday's stream, you're probably going to want to go back and read it. But we'll catch you up pretty quickly. But the long and the short of it was I've started a new One Ring campaign, and that is using the One Ring, which is a very cool system from the fine folks over there at Free League, originally from Cubicle 7. And it had me thinking back to this old post from about 15 years ago so this is before 5th edition D&D, where an experienced GM ran some of his players who had only ever played modern RPGs, like 3rd edition D&D, through a BX campaign. And it started off with them just making random characters and getting TPK'd a bunch. And so then the group said, okay, you know what, let's actually try to play a little bit. And so for whatever reason, they inspired it by The Lord of the Rings, and they made a party consisting of characters, 8 PCs, played by 7 players, consisting of different characters from Lord of the Rings. And they started going into these random dungeons. And I made some commentary about, old school D&D play and some of the things that I like and some of the things I dislike, including just completely random nonsense dungeons and huge, long, empty corridors that lead to empty rooms, which lead to more empty doors, which lead to more empty corridors. But throughout the course of, several adventures, we lost a number of members of the Fellowship. Aragorn died. Sam died, Gimli died, and they have been replaced by a number of new characters. Aragorn was replaced by Bard. Now, of course, this is BXD&D, so Elf and Dwarf and Halfling are a class. There is no Bard class. Bard is, Bard, the character from Lord of the Rings. So he's a thief, because that's the only thief, fighter, magic user, cleric. Those are the only other classes that aren't elf, hobbit, or dwarf. And then, most notably, in one of the dungeons, they did manage to find a +2 sword called, which Boromir claimed and named Usurper. And at the end of our last stream, the fine folks of the Fellowship of the Bling had been severely blinded by a group of pixies or brownies, I can't remember which one it was, who had cast continual light on their faces. And when you get continual light cast on your face, you are basically, essentially blinded forever. So that is where we're going to pick things up here again today. What's up, Scotty?
Scott if tipped $50. I would love to see you read an adventure to kick off upcoming streams. These are awesome.
Well, thank you, Scotty. Appreciate you. When you say read, you mean like, read one of my adventures or read one of their adventures? Whose adventures are we talking about here? Because I would like to know. Like you said, read an adventure. You mean like going back to the old school thing that we were talking about, Scotty? Like going through the old, like starting with like the G series modules? Yeah, that'd be kind of cool, Scotty. We should totally do that. If that's what you meant, Scotty, I'm on board. So, anyways, why did that go to a random page? I don't know. And by the way, confirming what I had said the other day, the mailer did make a note here which says, I will give XP on final info from the last session. Keep in mind, the Fellowship Bling has only actually had two sessions. Several delves occur in a single session. So, and there is at least one person who's nearly halfway to second level. So again, there's this idea, right, that like you might go through multiple adventures in a single go. All right. I don't remember where we are here. Here we go. Okay. Had to find it. No, I see. You just mean read a Lord of the Bling's adventure at the beginning of every session. I got you. Just keep it going. So there was some debate or some questioning about how this would work. So a couple of things here first. Let me... somebody asked about the thief percentage abilities. So, excuse me.
Clubster roll tip $40. So are we still on track for Dagger Hard next Wednesday? Spilt this between the super chat as well, smile.
Thank you, Klopster. Yeah, so Klopster, one of the things I need to do is create your guys' posts, like I've been doing with the One Ring folks. As I said, I think to Hodop in the one chat, I'm about a week or so or two behind on some of the things. So the answer is, Klopster, I don't know. The reason I say that is because there is, I think the day before we are scheduled to play, there is a new Daggerheart module coming out for Alchemy VTT. And it looks really pretty and it looks really nice. And I've been trying to get Alchemy to just, give me a copy of it so that I could be like, hey, I'm going to show it off and I'm going to use it on my actual play. And if they do give it to me, then I kind of want to use it. And I don't know if I'll be able to like learn enough to be able to feel comfortable running you all through it through session 0. But step 1 is I have to get that up. So the answer, Klopster, at this point, I would say is 50-50. Just because, again, I was sick and then I didn't stream for a week and I've been trying to get caught back up on stuff. And so I still have to get everybody's, I still have to do a poll with everyone, Klopster, to see, or a survey. Is everybody okay with being recorded or streamed just to the patrons or just to YouTube? So we have to do a couple of that stuff, kind of in advance. And, while the Daggerheart campaign is only scheduled for 6 sessions, obviously we still need to, have a session 0 and, create characters and all that other stuff. And not to mention, decide, or me, I have to decide what the campaign frame is going to look at. The campaign frame doesn't matter. It does matter, but it doesn't matter quite so much just because it is a relatively short, game. I don't know what the leveling up, so this is completely tangent, but thank you, Klopster. Again, people pay what they pay, and if we end up going like 7 sessions, like I think that's fine. Because what I'd really like to do, Klopster, if it was up to me, is get through tier 1, tier 2. So that would mean you guys would obviously start at level 1. You would go to level 2, play through level 2, get to level 3, play through level 3, get to level 4, play at least one session at level 4. And that would, I think, be a really fun, arc. So it would be kind of hyper accelerated, but I think that would give everybody a nice little taste of the game. Doing that in 6 sessions is a little tough, especially when you include a character creation session. So we may have to end up padding a session or 2. And again, I'm not going to like... The cost is the cost. That's set. At that point, it's more for me just being like, I want to, have the kind of campaign I want to have. And once people are bought into that, they're bought into that. So anyways, long story short, I'm hoping, but it really comes down to this alchemy. Otherwise, we'll use Foundry and Foundryborn, which is fine, which is totally fine. But it would be kind of cool to kind of show off that new alchemy thing because it does look really cool and all that other jazz. So, and we do have a couple of I's and T's that need to be dotted and crossed regarding permission and making sure everybody's on board with that and stuff like that. We got some shout outs coming in here. Wargasm enjoyed testing the new Nimble Armor rules with Cinnabos and Klopster. Great people to game with. Fantastic. And then Ray Tales would like to give a shout out to Scotty F for the Tunnels and Troll Quick Start game last Saturday, having had a lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, we were playing a bunch of cool games, and Orgasm, I will freely admit I'm a little suspicious about the armor rules from Nimble. I'm a little suspicious. So no, we do not know yet what. Not because I think that they're okay. This is going to sound terrible. Sorry, Evan, if you watch this. Not because I think they're bad. I just think that they're heavy-handed and a little boring. And I don't like that they don't scale, and I don't like that they're so like brutally punishing. Now, and yes, I understand the idea, like, oh, just don't put heavy armor on lower level monsters. Fine, that's an easy enough sort of heuristic to go by, but something about it just, I don't know, something about it just doesn't feel great to me. Anyways, I don't know what it is. I get the problems that people were talking about with the current one or the old rules, but yeah. Anyways, so. Anyways, thank you, Klobster. I will try to swap that over there. So in terms of percentages, people ask what are the percentages. So here are the percentages for a level 1 thief. You have a 15% chance to open locks, a 10% to find or remove traps, a 20% to pick pockets, 20% to move silently, 10% to hide in shadows, an 87% to climb sheer surfaces, and a 1 or 2 on a d6 to hear noises. So there you go. Then there was a question about how would you actually get rid of the blindness. Now, of course, our individual here decided to use Dispel Magic, which is a level 2, I believe, spell for in D&D. I think. Maybe not. And some people said, aren't there easier, cheaper spells that the cleric can use? Well, yes, except BXD&D doesn't even get to second-level cleric spells. So in BXD&D, you don't even have second-level cleric spells. So, so the answer would be no, the cleric has nothing that you could possibly use. So Dispel Magic is kind of really your only, the only thing that you really have options to. So, well, unfortunately, Continual Darkness is not in Basic, and there are no reversed spells in Basic. So we are SOL. Right. But again, they don't have those spells in basic D&D. So, what are we going to do? We only have so many options. We only have third level spell here. Sorry, they do have second level cleric spells. They just have Bless, Hold Person, and Silence 15-foot radius. And the only third level magic spells are Dispel Magic, Fireball, and Fly. So there you go. So that is why ultimately they used Dispel Magic. So back to the stories. Again, thank you, Kloster. Thank you, Scotty. So the group decides to head to the infamous... oh, maybe they can be reversed. Maybe you're right. I don't know. They can be reversed in the D&D expert rules. So I just looked it up. So yes, reversing does come in during expert, but in basic D&D, there is no reversing. So there you go. That's why some of them have an asterisk. So you're not wrong, but that is for expert level play. Not for the likes of basic D&D. Don't come in here with your pro level, expert level shenanigans, okay? All right. So they decide to head to the Caves of Chaos, B2, Keep on the Borderland. And we get I don't know why scrolling in like that just destroys everything. All right. So the blinding light still burned in the eyes of the 4 Fellowship members when they returned to Rivendell. Those cursed brownies had cast continual light in their faces, and Gandalf asked Elrond for arcane assistance. Elrond, I could dispel this magical malady, but to divert my powerful 10th level magics for this task would require 1,000 gold pieces in expenses. Perhaps a less powerful elf can aid you. Now, I actually don't know where this rule came from, if they just made it up or his house rule, but apparently this GM was under the impression that the level of the NPC times 100 was the cost per casting of a spell. So a 10th level elf would be 1,000 gold pieces, whereas a 5th level elf would be 500 gold pieces. And of course, a 5th level elf is the lowest level elf that could cast a 3rd level spell, ergo could cast Dispel Magic. So they cast 500 GP Dispel Magic, basically draining the group of their coffers. And Gandalf says, we are now very low on gold. I have heard rumors of a cave system known only as the Caves of Chaos. It is said that much treasure can be found there, and treasure is power, the power we need to confront Sauron. I have also heard of these Caves of Chaos, Boromir added, and the way I hear it, only death may be found there. Not with 10,000 men could you do this. Legolas stepped forward. I know of an elf who disappeared in a marsh near the caves, but I am not afraid. Tell me your riddle, Bridgekeeper. I am not afraid. I also know of this elf who disappeared into the marshes, said Gandalf. Likely fell victim to the lizard men who inhabit that area. It is unfortunate Gimli is no longer with us, said Bard, because rumor has it that bugbears fear dwarves. They say a fair maiden is held captives in the caves, added Merry. That is reason enough for me, Merry, said Boromir. To the caves, I say. But first, some rules clarifications, because remember, people are telling him stuff as we're going. A, there are no friendly fire rules in BX D&D. Archers may now fire at engaged enemies without fear of hitting friends. However, cover modifiers will apply when friendlies are in the line of fire, and a shot will not be available at all if too many friendlies are in line of sight. Will result in a more prominent role for ranged weapons. Fair enough. Melee range is 5 feet in BX rather than 10 feet. Resulting will be slightly harder and more defined battle lines. This is actually like a weird carryover from like OD&D and from like original basic, where melee range was 10 feet and it's a whole other thing. Not that this really matters too much because they were playing, the theater of the mind. And then lastly, and this actually I don't agree with, now he's not wrong. Nothing in the BX sleep spell indicates that friendlies are affected, but I don't necessarily know that I would ever make this ruling. Nothing in the BX sleep spell indicates that friendlies are affected when in the area of effect, which is why Gandalf hasn't been casting sleep. Sleep may now be cast when overlapping friendlies. Result will make sleep spell more usable in more situations. So, for those of you who don't know, sleep, especially back in BX D&D, was basically a tactical nuclear weapon, So basically, he decided that it doesn't apparently work, on it only targets. It basically targets what you can selectively target rather than treating it as an AOE, which nothing in the actual description of the spell really says that it is or it isn't. So that was just the GM sort of making a decision. In any case, and so the Fellowship stands before an open cave on the north side of the valley. Bard strikes a torch and draws his sword, darting into the shadows of the cavern. Now, here's where we have a really cool moment, which is because now, for the first time, we actually have a map of this. Because we're actually going into a published module instead of just literally a randomly procedurally generated dungeon. So I think we're going into cave B. Yeah, cave B, which I think is the Orc Cave. So, sorry about that. I'm just scrolling all over the place and making a big mess of stuff. So that means that we are going into right here. We're going into the B cave. All right. So they are bypassing the A cave, which is actually on the valley floor. And they are actually going slightly. The B cave is technically the first cave if on the right when you first enter, but it is about, 60 or 70 feet, 80 feet up the ravine wall. So typically in the Caves of Chaos, anything closer to the valley floor or to the ravine floor is easier. Anything further up the ravine walls is more difficult. And then anything further back down the box canyon becomes more and more difficult. So things like the D cave, the A cave, the B cave are among the easiest of the caves. So this is where we're actually headed. We're heading into the B cave here. Okay, so we can kind of see. Remember, this is a scale. 1 square is 10 feet, not the 5 feet that you're probably used to from modern adventures. Back then, every square was 10 feet. And the reason for this, among many other reasons, is because the map wasn't designed to be used as a battle map. It was designed to facilitate exploration, not, battle mats and combats. Okay. So we're actually going to be heading into the B cave. Interestingly enough, by the way, the B cave, through a secret door here in room 12, does go over into the, I think it's the F cave or something like that. But anyways, so this is the B cave, which consists of rooms 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 officially. All right, so. Boop, there we go. We're back. Okay. And so the fellowship stands before an open cave on the north side of the valley. Bard strikes a torch and draws his sword, darting forward into the shadows of the cavern. The rest of the fellowship waits a few moments and then follow Bard into the cave. Gandalf holds the torch aloft. Quickly, Bard reaches a T intersection. Walls decorated with... actually, you know what? Let me do something real quick here. I'm going to shrink this bad boy down. Quickly reaches a T intersection. Walls decorated with skulls of humans, elves, dwarves in various states of decay. Bard signals a hold to the party and takes a moment to search for traps. Trekkie says, as do all who live through such times, Froblo. But it's not for us to decide if they live or die. Such even the wise cannot see very much ends. All we have left to do is roll the dice that we are given. Sounds of activity come from the west. Silence to the east. Bard, the thief, the scout, signals the party east and takes the turn. Bard hears the quiet sound of a bell chiming down the passageway. 4 orcs, each carrying 2 spears, charge out of the chamber, roaring, ready for combat. But Bard is quick. He falls back, takes the turn, and rejoins the fellowship. Orcs! Bard hisses. At least 4. The fellowship braces for combat. The orcs come barreling around the corner. They stop short in the intersection and hurl spears into the fellowship's front line. A spear crashes into Merry's shield. Merry cries out, and another spear deeply pierces Boromir's thigh. Both wounded. Merry and Boromir halt their charge and hold the line. The fellowship unleashes a furious barrage of arrows and stones into the orcs, but only delivers scrapes and contusions through the orcs' shabby armor. The orcs level their second spears and charge the front line. Metal and wood clash, crashing loudly, and more arrows and stones are loosed at the orcs, with a scrape or 2 harassing the enemy, but nothing more. Boromir and Merry fall back under the driving spears of the orcs. Frodo and Legolas take their place in the front rank, maintaining the rocky bottleneck. Sword and spear clash. Then 5 more orcs charge into the crowded intersection, pressing into the first orcs and trying to get into the fight. Bard and Merry fire off a couple of arrows, but can't get a shot in the crowded conditions. Then Gandalf blasts off a sleep spell. Thud! Thud, thud, thud. 4 of the orcs in the back, who just arrived, fall to the rocky floor. Frodo and Legolas continue clashing hand to hand with the orcs. Frodo rakes one who looks like it's about to fall. Then an orc stabs low with a spear, piercing through Legolas's plate armor. The elf shrieks, and the orc drives the spear in deeper, running him through completely. Legolas is slain! Or better yet,
Whoops. Whoopsie.
the orcs press the attack. One forcing its way into the gap and engaging Pippin. Two are now on Frodo. They're breaking through the line, Boromir cries out. One of the orcs near the back, who still has an extra spear, hurls it into the densely crowded fellowship, just missing Bard. A spearhead pierces Frodo's shoulder, but the hobbit is stalwart and continues the fight. A couple of arrows and sling stones hurl harmlessly through the narrow cavern, and Frodo finishes off the orc he had been wearing down. 4 orcs remain, but they turn to flee when the 5th of their number goes down under Frodo's blade. Pippin gives one good slice as they flee, and a few arrows and stones fly past the orcs as they disappear into the darkness of the cave. 90 XP. The sleeping orcs are slain, and Legolas's body dragged from the cave. A debate ensues whether to press the attack while the orcs are on the run or return to Rivendell. A smaller group decides to split off and enter the cave in hopes of grabbing loot, while Gandalf leads the wounded back to Rivendell. Never split the party, they just split the party. Look, magic user already cast his sleep spell. He's no good anyways, okay? Pippin, Bard, Nilfin, and Frodo re-enter the cave. They turn east at the skull-covered intersection and find 3 wounded orcs cowering there. They lift spears and tighten their ranks. Frodo demands they surrender, but they don't understand or simply refuse because they charge the fellowship. Bard puts one down with an arrow, and Frodo wounds another. Spear, blade, clashing. Bard takes down another, and Frodo and Pippin corner the last one. Bard lines up a shot and puts an arrow through its throat. The 4 adventurers take a moment to search the rocky chamber, but find nothing. 30 XP. I think it's best if we be leaving, Pippin says. And with that, the 4 leave and catch up with Gandalf. Each member receives 17 XP and no treasure. Trekkie, you maniacs! You killed Orlando Bloom. He was the heart of the franchise. What are you doing? Now, that's especially brutal because Legolas even had plate mail, right? He had found that plate mail and he got it. All right, so Legolas just died. So a couple of things. Again, you know, I like to take. Now remember, every time they go into the caves, that is not an entire set. That is not an entire session. Okay, that's called an adventure, and it basically means one foray into the dungeon and back. You might do several adventures in a single session. So a couple of things just for people who may not be aware of this. Number one, the idea of 5-foot squares did not exist. The idea that one human being or human-sized being would occupy a entire 25 square feet of space, aka a 5-foot by 5-foot square, was not only not the case, it was also considered fairly ludicrous and silly. The fact of the matter is that at this time in this place, you could have, and remember, these corridors are also 10 feet wide. These squares are 10 feet. So a 10-foot wide corridor might be able to have, depending on what kind of weapons you are using, if you're using spears, you might be able to bring 3 or 4 or even 5 spears to bear against a line of foes. Okay, so the tactics and the kind of combat played out a lot more, I hate to say it, but it played out a little bit more war gamey, with like, with like units of troops, like small unit tactics, right? It wasn't the kind of superhero we're all running around doing parkour, flipping through the air, turning into smoke and shooting across a battlefield, leaving a trail of sparks which explode after we pass by. No, it was much more like everyone's huddled up behind shields, taking pot shots, stabbing over the top with your spear, trying to cover each other's back, kind of bashing into the lines, kind of rocking back and forth, using the fact that the corridor is sort of a bottleneck to prevent the foes, which outnumber you, right, from getting around your flank and starting to attack people. so this idea that like so this idea that like you know, that you would just have like, you know, I've seen corridors in adventure paths from Paizo, from Wizard of the Coast, where the corridor is literally 5 feet wide, right? It's a 5 foot square. So if you had a fight in that corridor using the rules of D&D, one person in the entire party could be potentially attacking, right? So things were very different back then. So here's just an update from the GM. You'll see a lot more ranged action from the hobbits now that I've removed the incorrect friendly fire rule. But some other things to keep in mind. Party composition is odd. With so many hobbits in the party, some have to serve as frontline fighters. Because of stat rolls and equipment choices, some halflings are as good or even better at melee. Merry carries a shield, plate, and is strong. He's a tank. He carries a sling because I don't allow bows with shields, nor do I allow a switch to sword and shield from a bow in a single round. So Merry is an all-around better fighter. Pippin pretty much sucks at everything, so he just tries to stay out of trouble. Frodo is a little better with bow, but he has really high hit points, so he subs in between ranged and melee as needed. Sam was equally skilled, and so armored and shielded and served up front. Aragorn was strong, but average dexterity. He was a better fighter, but poorly armored. Bard is good at it all. Dungeons are very claustrophobic. If you were to play this on a grid, the realism of the close confines comes into play, and sometimes it's really hard to bring max fire to the enemy. 8 to 10 people bumbling around in a narrow passage gets pretty crowded.
I'm leaving a trail when I use Salamander Charge and just burn the entire orc line down cause they are all grouped up.
Yeah, exactly. So very, very D&D and the role-playing games have come a long way from this time period, I will say this. All right, the Caves of Chaos. Cave B, the return trip. Thank you, Cal. The Fellowship of the Bling is Bard, Gandalf, Frodo, Nilfin, Merry, Pippin, Boromir, and Arwen with 8 hit points. Big ups for Arwen Umdomniel. All of Rivendell devotes itself to a poignant funeral for Legolas. After much weeping, the Fellowship prepares for adventure. Arwen, Liv Tyler in the movie, has volunteered to replace the fallen Legolas. Rivendell craftsmen repair and refit Legolas's plate armor for Arwen. And so the Fellowship returns to Cave B in the Caves of Chaos. Bard takes the lead and enters the dark cave, coming quickly to the intersection decorated with skulls. Orc bodies are still piled up here. They don't even bury their own dead. Bard takes a left and enters into some winding caverns. Ahead, he can see the passage leads to a larger chamber, so he carefully creeps forward and takes a look. It looks like some kind of banquet hall. There is a crude fireplace built into the rocky cavern wall, a table, and one very large chair, which may serve as a primitive throne. Additional passages exit the chamber, but the hall is otherwise unoccupied. Bard snuffs his torch and discards it, moving into the shadowy hall, with the embers of the fireplace providing just enough light to see by. Bard signals the rest of the Fellowship to halt as they are entering the banquet room. Then he slips into a short west passage to peek into the next chamber. So he's basically sneaking through chamber 9, and he's searching, but he's going up into he's going through chamber 9, and he's popping up into chamber 10. Okay. Then he slips into a short west passage to peek into the next chamber. As he approaches the dark chamber, he hears the rustles, grunts, and roars of several orcs. Maybe 24 of them. 120 XP. None, however, is awarded for the women and children. Bard falls back and warns the Fellowship. They decide to quietly move through the banquet chamber to the north passage, avoiding the room full of orcs. The northern passage is an ascending slope which comes to an east-west intersection. East is a door, so the party stacks up and listens. Hearing nothing, they attempt to open the door, but find it locked. Bard opens his thieves' tools and gets to work. "This lock is rusted so badly I can't get the tumblers to move," said Bard. "I think we are far enough away from the orcs that we can risk a kick without them hearing," says Gandalf. Wham! Bard's muscular leg kicks the door in. Looks like a storage room. The Fellowship moves in and closes the door behind them. Searching the room, they find several orcish spears, a few shields, a crossbow, and some bolts. Gandalf sacks up the crossbow and bolts, and the rest of the party begins searching for secret doors. Finding nothing else of value, the Fellowship departs the storage room, and with Bard in the lead, begins heading west down the long, winding passage. Bard moves about 60 feet, then happens to look up and notice that the ceiling of the passage is covered in dripping green slime. Bard backpedals just in time to avoid the slimy mass as it begins splattering to the floor. The bubbling green blob is now slowly oozing up towards Bard. Bard falls back until the rest of the party catches up. They strike up a couple of extra torches and carefully burn away the green slime off of the rocky floor. 5 XP. Bard resumes scouting, and the rest of the party follow 40 feet up behind. Bard comes to a door and listens, hearing nothing. When the rest of the party arrives, Arwen and Boromir also listen to the door, but hear nothing but silence. Bard. This is going to be good. Just because I know that this orc has a lot of treasure. This is the orc chief. I actually don't remember. Here's this crazy thing. I don't remember this story. But I have run Keep on the Borderlands so many times. I literally know every single one of these chambers by heart. Bard kicks in the door, and Boromir and Merry charge in first. Carpeted cave with tapestries, furnishings, and a large stuffed mattress on the floor. The orc chief and his mates quickly react to the intrusion, jumping to their feet and grabbing weapons. The orc chief wears chainmail, carries a shield and mace, and is rippling with muscle. It roars and charges into battle. Merry and Boromir charge forward into the orc chief. Frodo and Nilfin engage the chief's warrior mates. An arrow sinks into the chief's chest, and another into one of their mates, but neither falls. Then Gandalf casts his sleep spell. Both of the female orcs fall to the floor, but the orc chief still stands. Merry and Boromir clash with the orc chieftain, but even Boromir's mighty sword, the blade usurper, is turned away by the orc's powerful shield. The orc chief smashes its mace hard into Boromir's shield, but the mighty warrior staggers, holding his ground. Now, Frodo and Nilfin step over the sleeping females and begin to crowd in around the orc chieftain. The other members of the Fellowship knock arrows and look to get a shot past their friends, but cannot find an opening. Frodo and Nilfin try to flank the orc chief, but the savage leader puts his back to a wall and repels all 4 of the slashing sword attacks coming at him. Then the orc's mace smashes into Boromir's elbow. "Ah!" Boromir yells out. Boromir falls back, nursing his smashed elbow, and the other 3 Fellowship members press the attack. Arwen, Pippin, and Bard continue to look for an opening to get a shot, but their friends are still blocking their line of sight. The orc chief blocks blow after blow after blow with his powerful shield, but Frodo manages to get one past and scratches its knee, which only seems to make the orc chief angrier because it raises his mace high and brings it down hard at Merry. Merry gets his shield up just in time. But the orc chief doesn't stop. He swings again and again and again at Merry. Clang, clang, clang. Merry keeps the shield up, barely holding back the terrific onslaught. Frodo steps aside at just the right moment. Then Pippin, having lined up a shot, thump. The orc shrieks as the arrow sinks into its stomach. The orc takes a split second to glance at the arrow jutting out of him, and Nilfin takes the opportunity to smash the orc's chief's face in. 135 XP. The orc chief is slain. His mates gagged and hogtied. The Fellowship searches the gaudy room, finding 44 GP and a gem valued at 700 gold. They find an alcove behind a tapestry with an iron chest, a couple of suits of chainmail, some shabby swords. Behind a boulder, they find a potion of healing and a scroll of fireball. Arwen casts Detect Magic, and the dead orc chief's shield glows brightly. That shield is magical, she says. You should take it, Mary. Mary discards his banged-up shield and grabs the magical +1 shield. Right then, 9 halflings barge into the chamber, bearing short swords. Halt! A halfling cries. That's our loot you're sacking up. How do you figure, half-pint? Demands Boromir. We have journeyed far and traversed these dangerous caves on a great and noble quest for loot. We claim it by adventurer's right. You only made it this far because you followed the trail we blazed, asserts Boromir. I'm sorry, little ones, but Boromir is right, said Gandalf. It was us who battled the orcs, lost a dear companion, and felled the orc chieftain. And it is us who will be taking the treasure today. Very well, wizard, a halfling concedes. Is there anything we can do to get a little taste of that loot? We would gladly pay you 100 gold, simply to have you help us remove this chest safely from the cave. 45 XP gained from the halfling encounter, by the way. The halflings agree, and the large group leaves with the chest, which contains only 137 gold in assorted coins. After paying the halflings, each member of the Fellowship leaves with 98 gold and 136 experience points. Note, these halflings are not the retainers I mentioned earlier. The Fellowship will actually go on to acquire 2 permanent hirelings in the report that will feature later tomorrow evening. All right, so again, hey, we had a super chat here. What shall we do with these mates? Slavery? Well, there's nothing to be accounted for taste. You just leave them and figure that the other orcs will either free them and then they'll leave. Although interestingly, when I played Keep of the Borderlands with Bob, Bob ended up somehow he defeated the chieftain, and then Bob knocked unconscious his mate, and the orc was like, I surrender to you. Also, you are now married to the orc mate because you have initiated an orc mating ritual. So then Bob ended up basically acquiring the orc women as his mates. So there's that. Again, I want to reiterate something here, which is, there were, right after a boss fight against a powerful orc boss, I think it's a 2-hit dice orc with a +1 magic shield, the party immediately had a random encounter, which resulted in yet another social encounter. So again, everything that you're reading probably took less than, an hour of play, to get through, maybe an hour, maybe an hour and a half, 90 minutes, Well, listen, I knew who was in my party. Okay. Bob was in my party, and, I had to, acquiesce. Good night, Keith. Good having you. So a couple other things now, and by the way, for all intents and purposes, right, they fully cleared out one of those caves. And by the way, that wasn't the whole session. That was probably, and they went back to that cave twice. They went back to town, recovered, went back, and encountered it again. Another thing, which I want to point out, is somebody was talking about the low chance for open locks. So let's talk about that really quick before we proceed. Because opening locks was, quite frankly, was literally like a cheat code. Now, in this particular case, there are elements of dungeon design, even in this dungeon, that I don't think are ideal. If I have a locked door, I want there to be some good treasure. Generally, if you're gonna have a locked door, there should be something good behind there, right? Not just some random stuff. The idea, remember, in a game where treasure is quite literally experience points, the idea of a locked door with treasure behind it is, this idea that, if we find the key which is could be on maybe on a necklace around a powerful monster, or it could be hidden, right? Or you have to break down the door, which is loud and potentially takes a lot of time and could generate a lot of random encounter rolls, which are all bad news. But if you can open the lock without having to even get the key, you could, quite frankly, get all that treasure and not have to go through any of the bullshit that you would otherwise have to get to go through it. And so, the idea that, this idea that we have of modern gaming where it's like, well, there's a locked door, so you have to get through it because beyond that is the rest of the adventure, was just complete and utter nonsense. But also, more to the point, if the thief did manage to pick a lock, it was like, holy shit, it felt like you were cheating, right? Because, the game was basically like, think about like if you're playing like Legend of Zelda, right? And, you're walking around, you got to get the big master key in order to be able to get the cool big chest, to be able to get the cool hook shot or the, the bow and arrow or whatever. And, if you could just walk up to it, like, and the big chest is right there, early in the dungeon, and you could just walk up to it and there was a 15% chance that you could just get that item right now without having to do the rest of the dungeon, you'd be like, holy shit, that's amazing. That feels like cheating. So opening a lock like that was actually kind of like, it felt like a cheat mode. And that's one of the reasons why you could get away with having such a low percentage, because it didn't really, it wasn't predicated on, well, the adventure has to continue and there's only one way forward, Also, there was no adventure to ruin. Even in a modern day sense where opening locks is a lot easier, sometimes you'll still see, locks which are basically unpickable because of the DC being so high. And the idea being that, well, they're like, well, we can't have you go through there because it'll ruin the adventure. It'll ruin the plot. It'll ruin the tension, Yeah, so the difference, Trekkie, is that, you only recovered a hit point per day. So, if you went back to town, you might be in town for a week. So the idea of when I think of the 10-minute adventuring day, right, we traditionally think of like, you go into the dungeon, you fight one thing, you go back, you heal to full, you're back immediately. No, like it was a much different procedure there. All right. Let's see here. These are people discussing some of the rules and the changes, blah, blah, blah. All right. So they are going to Cave D next. Looks like. Yeah, okay. So let me change over the PDF. All right. All right, so here we are in Cave D. I think Cave D is in fact, actually, no. Cave D is the Goblin Caves. So, interestingly, Cave D is the Goblin Caves, but over here, Cave E, that is the Ogre Cave. But Cave D is a little bit more expansive. You can see Cave D kind of, there's kind of goes up and to the right, but it also, or I should say, left and around, going deeper up into the thing, but also you can go this way as well. And then it goes off onto the other side of the map. So, yeah, so this is where they're going. They're going to Cave D. This is where, in my last playthrough of Keep on the Borderlands, Bob and the party famously got drunk on goblin wine, and then I think found the secret door into the ogre's lair. He wasn't home, and then they peed all over the ogre's bed roll with their with the goblin wine pissed, goblin wine soaked piss. True story. Okay, so Cave D. The Fellowship of the Bling is Bard, Gandalf, Frodo, Nilfin, Merry, Pippin, Boromir, and Arwen. After distributing the modest loot and resting for a few days, the Fellowship returns to the Caves of Chaos. This time, they choose a cave on the southern wall of the valley. Gandalf strikes a lantern, and Bard slips in to the dark cave mouth. About 30 feet in, Bard comes to a 4-way intersection. The light of the cave mouth is now fading behind him. So Bard strikes up a torch and heads north. Soon he comes to a dead end and waits for the party to catch up. As the party approaches the 4-way intersection, they spot 6 goblins coming down the eastern passageway. Briark! One of the goblins cries out. Then they are all yelling Briark as they pull shabby little swords out and charge. The goblins catch the middle of the marching line before the Fellowship can get into position. 4 of the little buggers fall upon Arwen and Pippin. One of them sticks Pippin in the ribs, and the little hobbit cries out. Bard rushes back to join the fight. Everyone else tries to get into position in the claustrophobic intersection. Merry and Bard fire off an arrow and a slingstone, and 2 goblins fall dead. Arwen and Pippin clash with the goblins, who still stand, but fail to find mark with their blades. Pippin falls back. Merry takes his place, magical shield held forward. Bard and Frodo take shots with their short bows, but are unable to get a good shot over their fighting companions. Merry hacks down another goblin with short sword, and Arwen clashes with another. The remaining 3 goblins fill the gap left by their dead brethren and push the attack in on Merry and Arwen, but are unable to injure the heavily armored duo. Remember, Merry and Arwen are both rocking plate mail, and Merry has a magic shield. Bard sinks another arrow into a goblin, and Arwen and Frodo take out the last 2. After resting up, the party secures the intersection, and Bard scouts ahead in the northern passageway. After reaching a dead end, Bard signals for Arwen, who joins him and searches for secret door. Finding nothing, the 2 rejoin their companions in the intersection. They now decide to take the eastern passage. Bard scouts ahead as they traverse the angled southeast passage. Bard comes to an opening in a chamber. The goblin guards here see Bard coming and take defensive positions in the doorway. Bard falls back a few feet and lets the party catch up. They approach the goblins in formation, goblins rattling their spears menacingly, and then the Fellowship unleashes a volley of arrows and slingstones. But only Frodo's arrow finds its mark, and a goblin falls dead to the chamber. But the goblins break and flee from the doorway, running deeper into the chamber. The Fellowship pursues, but the goblins have already exited out of the chamber through a southern passage. They find a barrel of several shabby goblin spears and a keg of water. That is correct. Reaction rolls were used for monsters that were pre-placed as well, Unfortunate Pumpkin. There were a few instances where an encounter, keep in mind that, this is only like the 5th or 6th adventure ever written, but sometimes an adventure would specify unique situations where a monster might attack. Otherwise you rolled it for everything. The Fellowship follows. So just so we're clear here, right? They encountered the party moved down this southeast corridor into room 17, right? The goblins saw them, turned around and fled basically out this passageway to the south here, down this or up this southern up the steps. Just so we're all clear here, what's going on. The Fellowship follows the retreating goblins into the southern passageway, taking a set of stone stairs up to a landing before the passageway turned sharply to the west. A few feet down the corridor, they find the 5 retreated goblins cowering before a closed door. "Put down your weapons," Arwen demands in the goblin tongue. The goblins quickly drop their spears and fall to their knees in a gesture of submission. Boromir and Merry cautiously move forward to collect the weapons. When the door suddenly flies open and a furious hobgoblin stands in the doorway, it roars when it sees the goblin, human, hobbit, elf party going on outside its door. The unarmed goblins shriek and flee, pushing their way past the Fellowship and vanishing back down the stairs. Arwen and Bard both sink an arrow into the roaring hobgoblin, and it thuds to the ground. A furious roar erupts from the chamber beyond, the cacophony of over a dozen enraged hobgoblins. "Oh, shit," says Pippin. Or, "oh, fuck," perhaps. Brace yourselves, yells Gandalf. Hobgoblins charge into the hall, spears forward, a crowd of 4 warrior males and 8 fighting fit females. Boromir and Merry brace to hold the line, and Arwen and Bard let off 2 arrows, and 2 hobgoblins are nicked. And that's when Gandalf busts off the sleep spell. 8 of the hobgoblins, crowded into the hall and doorway, suddenly fall to the floor in a tremendous heap. 4 fighting females in the room still stand, their spears before them. They charge into the hall, stepping on their fallen brethren as they charge down into Boromir and Merry. Blade and spear clash. Boromir hacks one down with a swing of the mighty sword. Usurper! Bard's arrow drops another one, and Merry and Boromir quickly finish off the last 2. Excellent, Gandalf says, after dealing with the sleeping hobgoblins 155 XP. They enter the hobgoblins' common chamber, finding barrels of beer and water and a few stray coins. Another door leads to a very long westerly passage. So that they're in room 23 now, and that long westerly passage is that one that they're talking about there. Shrinking that back down. Another door leads to a long westerly passage. With Bard well in the lead, the party begins the march. After some time, the party comes to a side passage. Bard signals the party and takes the turn. The winding side passage eventually leads to an opening in a chamber with a glowing orange torchlight. Bard snuffs his torch and moves in a little closer, hearing the sounds of a couple humanoids talking in a guttural voice. Then the sound of a scream, maybe human. Bard reunites the party. They shutter their lantern and approach the room. And then, when they get within 20 feet of the doorway, the Fellowship charges into the room. A torture chamber! There are a few humans and humanoids manacled to the wall or strapped to instruments of torture. 2 hideous, very large hobgoblins in chainmail are working the room. 1 holds a long whip. As soon as the Fellowship charges in, the huge hobgoblins both jerk swords from scabbards and growl into action. The Fellowship unleashes a ferocious volley of arrow and slingstone, but only 1 hobgoblin is nicked in the ear. Boromir, Merry, and Nilfin take the front line. 1 of the hideous hobgoblin charges, and the other cracks its whip. The whip wraps around Nilfin's neck, and the powerful humanoid yanks the cleric off of his feet. The other clashes into Boromir, but the sword usurper turns away the jagged blade of the hobgoblin. Nilfin struggles free from the whip as his companions fire another volley and another volley into the whip-wielding hobgoblins. 2 arrows sink into the beast, and it goes down to the ground with a whimper. 3 of the Fellowship pile onto the remaining hobgoblin, but the powerful savage creature repels their attacks. Wham! Sword crashes into Merry's magical shield. Wham! Another! And again, the stalwart hobbit also keeps fighting. Bard sees his opening and puts an arrow into the beast's side, and Frodo lands a blade into the creature's thigh. The hobgoblin continues to fight on. Then Merry sticks the savage with his short sword, and Boromir comes in with a killing stroke. The 2 hobgoblin torturers are slain. 60 XP. 1 of the dead hobgoblins has an amulet worth 135 GP. They rescue 2 men-at-arms, a merchant, and his wife. Then the Fellowship mercifully slays a tortured orc and gnoll. The fighting men grab swords from the dead hobgoblins, and the enlarged party returns to the corridor. Gandalf opens the lantern. "We must get these people back to safety," Gandalf says, and they begin the long trek back to the exit. After some time in the long winding passage, they come to the open door in the hobgoblin's common room. They are shocked to discover 3 giant gecko lizards munching on the dead hobgoblins. Gandalf unravels the scroll and reads the arcane words, unleashing a blazing fireball into the room. Fire, smoke, and the smell of roasted flesh erupt from the room. 150 XP. They walk past the charcoaled lizards and the blackened hobgoblin corpses and take the stone stairs down to the previously visited goblin caverns. More winding passageways, and soon the fellowship emerges from cave into sunlight, glad to be alive. They escort the rescued people back to the keep located on the borderlands. The merchant couple rewards the fellowship with 100 gold pieces and a magical dagger +1. And the 2 rescued men-at-arms swear service to the fellowship for 1 year. Thank you, Gandalf says as he sheaths the magic dagger. The fellowship returns to Rivendell, each member with 29 gold and 135 XP. Tasty Trekkie, referring to the whip cracking, says, sounds like a fun evening to me. You know, whatever floats your boat. So stay a while and listen. So a couple of things to note. Again, we kind of do this after each adventure. Number 1, wizards were exceptionally frail. You'll notice in all the descriptions of almost everything else, what we'll hear about Merry, you know, being a badass and, you know, tanking goblins and, you know, orc war chiefs and hobgoblin torturers. We'll read about Frodo even, you know, coming in and stabbing hobgoblins in the gut or in their thighs. You'll never hear about Gandalf. And it's because wizards were literally glass. They were artillery pieces. Okay. They got one spell and it was devastating. And you can see how gaining access to a scroll like a fireball spell, it wasn't just like, oh, hey, I'll do a couple extra points of damage. No, it literally deleted an entire encounter. And it goes without saying that 3 giant lizards would nearly be a TPK, obviously. And the fact that the monsters were between them and the known exit meant that if they decided not to go that way, they would be going back into the dungeon into unknown territory. So in order to get out, they would have to go through that encounter. Instead, they just fireballed them and killed them all, which is great. Third, you'll notice, now, to be fair, they've mostly been fighting a lot of humanoids, but you'll notice that, you know, there's lizards and there's other creatures, but they've been fighting a lot of humanoids. But even amongst the primitive humanoids, ranged weaponry, true ranged weaponry, maybe they have a javelin or spear that they can throw, but true ranged weaponries in the form of bows and crossbows are almost unheard of. And certainly, obviously, animals, beasts, creatures like that don't have access to ranged weaponry. And you can see just how powerful having access to ranged weapons is. You know, it's the equivalent of like, European, colonizers, devastating native populations because they had firearms. It is very much a one-sided advantage. And that's why we get into this sort of tracking ammunition. Nowadays we think of like, oh, it's more of a flavor thing. Like, do you use a bow? Do you use a, sword, whatever? No, like bows were really, really, really powerful. They let you kill your enemy at a distance. And most of the time, your enemies did not have a ranged weapon equivalency, right? And they could really, really be a force multiplier. So this is why, things like tracking arrows was a big deal, because back then when encumbrance was a, thing, you didn't have 100 arrows. You had 20, and it wasn't practical to carry any more than that. So each arrow you shot, right, was one less. And given how powerful the arrows could be, if you got some good rolls, you might delete an encounter. Imagine if a party surprises an enemy, and every party member has bow and sling or crossbow. You surprise an enemy. You all fire your bows. Then you win initiative. You all fire your bows. You might literally delete that entire encounter before they ever even get to make one attack roll. And when any one attack roll from an enemy could kill you, it feels really good. But then, you look down and you go, dang, I only have 13 arrows left. I only have 10 arrows left. I only have 6 arrows left, right? So there's this feeling of it, of like, oh shit, I'm running out, Yes, this is set in Middle-earth with B2 transplanted in, and yes, that is correct. It is the Fellowship of the Ring, but the Fellowship of the Bling, and they are in Middle-earth, but they're playing the Caves of Chaos. But their home base is Rivendell. Let's see here. More people talking about every time he posts, people would make all their, posts and like that. All right. The Caves of Chaos, Cave A. So now we are going to Cave A. So here's Cave A. Let me expand it a little bit so you guys can see. There we go. Cave A. This is the Kobold Cave. So we've got a pit trap here, a room to the left, a little nook here to the right, a long passageway which extends into rooms 6, a door to 3, 4, and 5. So that's where we're headed next, Cave A. Also, one of the cool things about Keep on the Borderlands specifically is there's about, 12 caves in general. And it isn't unusual for you to be able to get through a cave, even 2 caves, a night, per session. 3 would be pushing it depending on what you do. You might explore a third, but you might not completely clear it out. But there's a lot of like satisfaction in, clearing the dungeon cave by cave by cave. It's one of the reasons why Keep on the Borderlands, I think, is so satisfying. And it's pretty good for one-shots because each of these caves, you could play a one-shot. I've played one-shots before, many one-shots of Keep on the Borderlands. I played a lot of con one-shots of this using Dungeon World and BXD&D. In fact, a lot of those house rules for my BXD&D game come from this. And, these are my... I've shown these before, but these are my laminated initiative declaring cards. So but I basically every player gets I don't know where the rest of them are, but every player at my table gets one of these decks of cards. They're just laminated cards. And basically when we go around, right, because you declare in BXD&D. It's a declarative initiative. And rather than declare, I just have they can talk for a little bit. And what I'll do is I'll actually, I'll set an egg timer down. And I think it's like a 30-second egg timer. And then by the end of 30 seconds, you'll have to have thrown down your card. And then we roll for side-based initiative. And so this just makes it really quick because then, everyone's just they're like, I'm throwing a spell. And then they'll throw down their magic. They'll be like, close the melee and smash. And they'll just throw down melee. And then we roll initiative and we see, and then we kind of play out exactly what happens. Anyways, but all the times that I've run it at cons and the like is it's really satisfying because you can I've had groups that you kind of get the feeling of man, I feel like we beat 2 dungeons because usually even during a one shot and because the games are so simple, the groups can usually clear out 2 caves, 2.5 caves, 3 caves. So you get this kind of progression. And because different groups pick different caves, not every time I've run it, it's the same. Sometimes I've had groups that have gone, straight to the back. I've had groups that gone into Cave A. I've had groups that gone into Cave B and then Cave D. And then I've had groups that have gone to Cave C, So different groups go and proceed in different ways. So even though I've run it multiple times, it just plays out completely differently every time. Add to that random reaction rolls, random morale checks, right? Random encounters. It never plays out exactly the same, which is really, really fun for me as a GM because I get to kind of see how it proceeds differently. All right, so we are heading into Cave A, the Kobold Cave. We now have, by the way, is Trekkie still here? You'll appreciate this. The Fellowship of the Bling. We have Bard, Gandalf, Frodo, Nilfin, Merry, Pippin, Boromir, Arwen, and the 2 new men-at-arms hirelings, Cock and Ball. The Fellowship equip their new men-at-arms companions, Cock and Ball, with plate mail, shield, and sword. They set out again for the Caves of Chaos, finding a dark cavern hidden in a wooden area on the north side of the gorge. Bard slips into the cave, relying on the sunlight from outside. He quickly comes to a T-section. So Hibigami Shinobi wants to know, what the fuck? How did they afford plates? Well, to be clear, the Fellowship bought them plate mail, right? Not the men at arms. And then to answer your question, how did they afford plate mail? Plate mail. So leather armor was 20 gold, chainmail armor was 40 gold, and plate mail armor was 60 gold. So there you go. That is the answer. And a shield was 10 gold, by the way, just to reiterate that. So basically the party dropped, correct. They had that 700 GP gem, you know, so they have like their party fund, and the group probably decided, hey, let's pimp out our men at arms. So again, I'm going to stop here, but I just want to say something. One thing that I found is really, really useful, about hirelings and retainers. Now this group hasn't really had hirelings and retainers because they've had a big group and whatever, and, you know, they're fine. But hirelings and retainers are really powerful and really useful because they function a lot like red shirts, which is that it makes the game still feel dangerous and deadly. But because people are dying, you know, part of the problem with D&D is like, we're supposed to, you know, we have these parties, you know, 4 or 5 people, 6 people, and we're supposed to think that the game is really like, oh, this is really dangerous. And like, even in movies and television shows, right? People die. That's how we know the stakes are real. But like, no one ever actually dies in D&D, right? So retainers give you this kind of red shirt ability for people still to die, for the danger to feel real and pressing. But it's not the PCs that are dying. But believe it or not, the thing that I find better about hirelings and retainers is I have found almost entirely is that the hirelings or retainers become kind of like party pets. And the party will actually be more emotionally devastated or more invested in a hireling than they will in another PC, right? Like if my fellow PC, you know, Thaddeus is playing with me and Thaddeus dies, I'm just going to be like, tough shit, Thad. And they'll be like, you know, Thad's like, what are you going to roll next? You know, it's kind of like, it's like in a way you're like, Thaddeus, he will be back, right? In some new form. You know, it's almost like he'll be reincarnated in a new form. But like if a hireling dies, you're like, they're gone. They're just gone, you know? So there's this kind of like weird, there's this kind of weird situation here, you know? Right. Where you feel the loss of the hirelings almost more than you do your fellow party members. Correct. The party just gets XP for gold. They don't need to trade the GP for XP. Correct. They just get it. You get the gold, you get the experience points, and you still have the gold. So, all right. The Fellowship equipped their new men-at-arms with plate mail, shield, and swords. They head out to the Caves of Chaos. Got it. Okay, there we go. Sorry. Bard slips into the cave, relying on sunlight from outside. He quickly comes to a T-section and searches for traps, which is especially funny because for the first time ever, there is actually a trap there. Finding nothing, he takes the East Passage. 10 feet in, he spots a group of 6 kobold guards wielding spears. One of the kobolds sees Bard and barks out. Now, you might say, wait, didn't he just walk over a pit trap? He did, but a lot of pit traps back then only had a chance of activating. And I believe this particular trap only has like a 1 in 2 chance of activating when you cross it. Bard falls back from the 6 kobold guards, darting into the intersection. Click. Shoo. A pit trap that Bard missed earlier opens beneath his feet. Ah! Bard screams as he falls in. The pit hatch slams shut behind him, silencing the screams. The Fellowship sees Bard run back around the corner and fall straight into the pit. They run into the cave, moving towards the intersection to save the thief. Right about then, the kobold guards are charging into the intersection, and the two groups collide. So concerned about Bard, the party is surprised by the charging kobolds. 5 of them stop and hurl spears at Mary and Boromir, and another kobold takes off down the passageway to warn of intruders. A spear pierces Boromir's rib, and he yells out. Swords are drawn, and the Fellowship charges the kobolds. Fall back, Boromir, Gandalf yells. Arwen and Frodo pull bowstrings and unleash. An arrow slashes one of the little monsters, but it's still in the fight. Merry and Cock take the front, lashing out savagely at the kobolds. One of the kobolds is hacked down, another wounded. The kobolds unsheath daggers and attack. Merry is scratched, but the kobolds gain no ground. Merry steps forward into a gap in the kobold line. Frodo draws a blade and steps up to the front. Cock slams his sword into a kobold, rending it in twain. The remaining 3 kobolds yelp and flee off into the darkness of the eastern passageway. No, Gandalf yells out, do not pursue. We must rescue Bard from this treacherous pit. 25 XP. The Fellowship gathers around and prizes the pit trap open. Bard lays crumbled at the bottom of the pit, unmoving. He's gone, Gandalf says. Bard is slain! We will tear this cave apart until every kobold is a bloody heap, yells Boromir. The party regroups and takes the eastern passage. They traverse the long, dark, winding corridor for a while when they hear the pitter-patter of an approaching kobold horde. A crashing tide of kobolds cascade down the hall. Nearly 50 of them. 3 larger than the rest, wearing chainmail and even carrying bows. Merry and Cock take the front, and the tidal wave of kobolds crashes into them. A couple of arrows soar past Arwen and Frodo. Swords and spears clash, and Gandalf chants loudly above the din. The sleep spell hits and rips through the kobolds. 8 kobolds fall flat to the ground, opening a huge gap in the line. A deafening yelp erupts from the kobold horde, and they all break into flight. So many feet sound like pouring rain as they run and scatter off into the darkness. The Fellowship stomps in the heads of the sleeping kobolds and continues to surge forward. 225 XP. The Fellowship comes to a branch in the passageway and continues west. They come to a large chamber where much of the retreated kobold horde is now cowering. Over 30 of them. Gandalf points and demands the kobolds surrender in their native tongue. But the kobolds have been cornered in their homes and refuse to submit. They lower their spears and prepare to charge. Merry and Cock form a line in the doorway, and Arwen and Frodo fire off arrows. A couple of yelps erupt from the rushing tide of kobolds, and then the scaly wave crashes into the front line. Merry and Cock hack left and right into the kobold hold, spears bristling and jabbing all around them. Arwen and Frodo indiscriminately fire into the crowd, hearing yelps whenever an arrow connects. Then a kobold catches Cock hard in the thigh, and he screams out, "Ah!" The armored leg is slick with red blood. Enraged, he splits his assailer's skull. More kobolds fall, but the horde keeps pressing forward and grinding into the stalwart Fellowship. "Into the breach, Ball!" Gandalf commands. But Ball is shaken by the sight of the kobold horde and his injured friend, and cannot summon the courage to step upward into the line. The man-at-arms has failed his morale check. Bleeding, Cock falls back, and a couple of kobolds take the opportunity to surge into the gap in the line and assault Frodo and Arwen. The 2 archers drop their bows, scrambling for their swords. Pippin and Nelfin ready sling and bow, looking for a shot. A stone bounces off of a kobold's skull, and it collapses. Frodo hacks down another, and brave Arwen leaps into the gap, closing the line. Fighting side by side, Merry and Arwen are assailed by spear points. Frodo snatches his bow back off the floor, and he and Pippin let off a couple of arrows into the endless tide of kobolds. Spears and blades clash as the horde continues their assault. More kobolds go down. The males are dead, but the smaller females do not give up the attack. They swarm into the line to replace their fallen brethren. Arwen grunts in pain as a spear rakes into her side, but she stands strong. More kobolds go down to blade and spear, and soon the horde is broken. The remaining 16 kobolds fall backwards and cower into the corners and against the walls. The Fellowship charges in and takes command. They confiscate spears, snap them over knees, and manhandle the little kobolds and command them to lie down. The party searches the room, finding a few copper pieces and a bolt of silk worth 150 GP. "I'm sorry, Gandalf," Ball says. "I was overcome with fear." "No worries, Ball. It was a fearful encounter. We are down a man. Several of us are wounded, and my magics are tapped. We should flee for now and return in better condition." As they are leaving the cave, they encounter a group of 12 halflings as they are entering. Some of them are the same ones that they encountered over a week ago in the orc cave. "Great," says one of the halflings. "I suppose you've looted this cave too, haven't you? We found a bolt of silk, but nothing else. I expect there is much more to be found here." The halflings let out a cheer and disappear into the cave. 60 XP. "Well, that just takes the gruel cake," says Boromir. "Now they're going to dance in there on their little hare feet after we killed all the kobolds and loot the treasure that should be rightfully ours." "And so goes the life of an adventurer," Gandalf replies. Count yourself lucky that you have not shared in Bard's fate." And so each member of the Fellowship leaves Cave A with 21 gold and 65 XP. Cinnabos says, "Night folk. It was just eye roll up to this point, but I refuse to sit here and listen to Derek yell cock and ball over and over again." No problem, Andrew. Appreciate you. All right. By the way, we haven't even gotten to the good part yet. Oh, this is great. So Bard died. So Bard fell into a pit trap and died. As you may remember, Bard had 3 hit points. And when you fell into a 10-foot pit, which was pretty standard for level 1, you took D6 damage, which meant that there was a 66% chance that if Bard fell into a pit trap, he would die immediately. And he did die immediately. So only on a 1 or a 2 would he have not died. But instead, the GM obviously rolled a 3, 4, 5, or 6, and he was dead. Tasty Trekkie says, "It gets better." Oh, it gets way better. So goes the life. So they're down a thief, by the way, for those of you keeping track at home. Yes, the original thief, Aragorn, died. Then Bard the thief died to a pit trap, nonetheless. And so now they are down a thief yet again. But they do have 2 hirelings. Did I miss any super chats? I don't think so. Yes. Pumpkin says, "Damn, 225 XP for 50 kobolds. Fighting really was the worst way to get XP." Yes, a bolt of silk was worth 150 XP. 50 kobolds worth 225 XP. It really was the worst way. All right. They are going to go into Cave G. I got to find Cave G. That might actually be in the beginning of the book. We may have to go to the beginning of the book because the caves are on 2 different pages. Okay. They are going to Cave G. Cave G is on the first level. It's on the ravine floor, but it's all the way in the back, right? So this is obviously going to be a more difficult cave. In fact, knowing what I know, I'm like, oh shit. Hopefully they don't get fucked up. It's been a long time since I read this, so I don't actually remember everything that happens. Right, kobolds only counted as half a monster for XP and for hit points. They were the weakest, humanoid monster by far in the book. All right, the Fellowship of the Bling is Strider, Thief 1 with 6 hit points. Gandalf, Frodo, Nilfin, Merry, Pippin, Boromir, Arwen, and Cock and Ball. At Rivendell, Elrond introduces the Fellowship to their new scout, a gray-cloaked stranger. "Aragorn!" Frodo cried. "You're alive!" The hobbit runs to his friend, but the gray-cloaked stranger stops him. "I'm sorry, little one," the stranger says, "but you must be mistaken. My name is Strider." Frodo is crestfallen. For a moment, he thought his friend had somehow survived the vicious giant frog attack, but it was only wishful thinking. But then Strider glances across the room at Frodo and gives him a clever wink. "Aragorn lives!" He must be keeping his true identity hidden for a reason, and Frodo intends to keep his secret. The Fellowship stops at a keep along the borderlands on a way to the Caves of Chaos in hopes of hearing more rumors about the dangerous era. In a tavern, they learn a few things. Big dog-like men live high up in the caves. The altars are very dangerous. And with that, the Fellowship journeys back to the caves. "No point going back to the Kobold Caves," says Boromir. "Those greedy little half-pints will have looted anything not nailed to the floor by now." And so the Fellowship journeyed to the far western end of the valley and penetrated a dense wood where they found a hidden and mossy cave. The Fellowship gathered around the cave mouth, and Strider darts in, hand axe ready. A rotten stench assaults Strider's nose as he enters. The floor of this damp cave is littered with bones, rotting corpses, and dried branches and leaves. Strider wonders if entering this cave is a good idea at all. Sorry. The cave runs left and right. Strider heads left. A little deeper in the cave, the darkness forces Strider to strike a torch. More bones, more gnawed bodies, several branching passageways, and grottos. Trekkie says, "Cock and Ball are going to get crushed, aren't they?" I'll be honest with you, I don't remember what happens to them, so we'll find out together. I don't remember, but it seems likely. I mean, they are wearing plate mail and shields, so their AC is 2, which would be the equivalent of AC 18 in 5th edition terms, modern terms. More bones and more gnawed bodies, several branching passageways and grottos. Strider moves further south into a wider cavern, quietly stepping over and around dried and brittle bone. Glancing over his shoulder and can see that the Fellowship in Gandalf's lantern is about 40 feet back. Strider reaches the end of the wide passageway. The Fellowship regroups, and Strider slides in. The passage opens into another small chamber, and inside, Strider can hear the heavy breathing of some large, slumbering beast. He jams the torch in a jagged crack in the cave floor and begins creeping further into the room. A bear! No, not an ordinary bear. An owl bear. The beast breathes heavily in its deep sleep. Strider glances around the room. More debris, more bones, bodies, and branches. No immediate signs of treasure, but maybe something under all the litter. He glances back down the passage and can see the Fellowship's concerned faces in Gandalf's lantern light. Finally, Strider decides not to risk life and limb. He re-enters the passageway, grabs the torch, and rejoins the Fellowship. "Sleeping owlbear in there," Strider says. "I didn't see any treasure." The party makes haste back towards the entrance. 175 XP gained. Gathering at the entrance, the party discusses what to do next. "We still haven't checked up north," Strider says, pointing out the dark cavern, so they decide to take a look. Strider sleeps into the passageway, torch and axe at hand. The passageway winds into a damp chamber. We're approaching room 33 here, for those of you looking at the map. A shallow pool of water, the walls slick with dampness, gleam in Strider's torchlight. He cautiously approaches the shallow pool. At the edge, he can see the gleam of something gold in the water, maybe a goblet of some sort. Strider notices a large wet stone nearby move. It oozes towards him rapidly, but Strider scrambles backwards to his feet and notices the oozing stone. He backpedals towards the exit. Splat! Another ooze falls from the ceiling near the exit. Strider bolts past the blob and runs out of the chamber. 100 XP. DM note. Here's how I conducted this. When Strider got close enough to the ooze, I asked him to roll for surprise. Lucky for him, he passed the roll. Then I took initiative. Losing initiative could have been really bad for Strider, but fortunately, he won. Having initiative and a higher movement rate, Strider was never actually in danger from the second ooze, but I did narrate it dropping nearby, just for effect. There are blobs in there, Strider explains to the Fellowship. At least 2, maybe more. They are difficult to see until they're right next to you. Is there any treasure? Boromir asks. No, Strider lies. And so the Fellowship leaves Cave G with no treasure and 34 XP. They decide to venture to another cave before returning to Rivendell. Cave F. Holy shit. This was all in like one adventure. Where's Cave F? I don't remember Cave F. I think Cave F is... Okay. Yeah, Cave F is going to be tough because it depends which way they go, but Cave F is just on the border of the one half of the map and the other half of the map. So all the way over on the right is Cave F. Yeah, you kind of have to be flipping back and forth. Listen, in the real life, you would get this nice... Where the hell's my thing? I don't know where my Keep on the Borderlands is. I'm distraught. But in real life, you could take the thing out and then you'd have the whole map. It was, portrait size, landscape size. Anyways, the Fellowship of the Bling is Strider, Gandalf, Frodo, Nilfin, Merry, Pippin, Boromir, Arwen, Cock and Ball. The Fellowship leaves the shunned Cave G and strikes out for the southern wall of the valley. With a bit of a hike and a climb, they reach the dark and forbidding cave mouth. The cave walls are lined with skulls, dozens of them. 20 feet into the cave, the passageway stops and is blocked by a sturdy, barred door. Strider signals the party forward, and he and Arwen examine the door. Scratched on the door in common tongue are the words, "Come in, we would like to eat you for dinner." Bard spots no lock on the door, so he tries to push it open. "It's barred on the other side," says Strider. Boromir steps up to kick in the door. Wham! He can hear the bar wrenching loose. It takes several thunderous kicks to finally dislodge the bar and crack open the door. The Fellowship is greeted with 6 hobgoblins, ready and in battle formation. 3 are poised in front with heavy maces, and 3 more are in the back with crossbows aimed over their shoulders. Crossbow bolts are unleashed into the Fellowship. A bolt bursts apart on Merry's magical shield. Another bolt hits Boromir right in the chest. The warrior gasps. He stumbles to his knees. The mighty sword, Usurper, clatters to the stone floor. Boromir is slain. Arwen and Frodo return fire with bow and arrow. A hobgoblin yells out, but none fall. And that is when Gandalf hits them with a sleep spell. All 6 of the hobgoblin guards drop suddenly to the floor. Angry about their fallen companion, the Fellowship slays the sleeping monsters messily. Find 19 gold on the corpses. 90 XP. "We must move on," Gandalf says. "Try to find some treasure so that poor Boromir's death is not wasted." "I think it's what he would have wanted," said Frodo. Strider takes up the mighty sword Usurper for now. The party moves ahead, quickly reaching a 4-way intersection. According to my map of these caves, says Gandalf, the eastern passageway leads back to the hobgoblin torture chamber that we raided earlier, and eventually, through that, back to the goblin caves. And so, the Fellowship chooses the northwest passage. So basically, on my map here, going to the right leads back to the hobgoblin torture chamber, so they're basically taking this northwest angled passageway. The Fellowship chooses the northwest angled passage. Strider strikes out in the lead, coming eventually to a branch in the passage. Ducking into the branch, he finds himself in a large room. This room is mostly empty, so Strider returns to the passage. The winding passage soon leads to a door. Strider puts ear to wood and listens, hearing only silence. Quietly opening the door, he sees a large room, an armory, filled with weapons and armor of all sorts on racks and pegs. He gives the Fellowship a moment to catch up, and then he and Arwen slip in to search the room. 2 hobgoblins in chainmail are waiting in ambush right next to the door. Arwen screams in surprise, and Strider flinches. The hobgoblins lash out furiously with swords. A sword crashes into Arwen but does not pierce the strong plate, and Strider manages to just duck under the first blow. Strider and Arwen fall backwards into the corridor, and Cock, Ball, Mary, and Nilfin push past the armory to engage the monstrous guards. Nilfin smacks one with the mace, but the 2 savage guards do not give up the assault. Then a 3rd hobgoblin pops up from behind a weapon rack and fires a crossbow bolt at Cock. Pang! The bolt harmlessly deflects off of a helmet. Nilfin and Cock block mace blows with shield and press the attack. Ball savagely slashes a hobgoblin, but the sputtering beast continues to fight. Mace and shield clash, and the 3rd hobgoblin speedily reloads its crossbow. Frodo and Pippin now force their way into the room and charge at the crossbow-wielding hobgoblin. The beast drops its crossbow and yanks a sword from a scabbard. Bangs, screams, and the clash of combat ring out throughout the armory as battle rages across the room. The hobgoblin, Pippin, and Frodo are raising swords high and bring it down on Pippin's skull. The blade bites deep into the poor hoblet's forehead, and his eyes glaze over as he slumps and thumps down to the floor. Pippin is slain! Pippin! Frodo cries out, "No!" The hobgoblin roars as Frodo sticks his short sword into its gut. It does not go down. The battle continues. Ball slays one of the hobgoblins, and the 4 surround the remaining one. Frodo slashes his opponent again, but the unstoppable beast keeps up the fight. Cock screams out as the surrounded hobgoblin stabs a sword deep into his belly. Cock is slain. Oh! Hobgoblin blade smashes into Frodo's armored ribcage. Only a bruise, but painful. The surrounded hobgoblin is finally hacked to pieces, and the 3 turn to aid Frodo, who is savagely clashing with the last hobgoblin. Seeing the charging reinforcements, the hobgoblin abandons its fight with Frodo and runs for the back wall. It triggers a secret door and darts into a hallway. 45 XP. Do not pursue! We are battered, and we may not withstand another attack. We must retreat! Arwen quickly mutters an incantation and casts Detect Magic to make sure none of the armory weapons are magical, but they are all mundane. The battered and defeated Fellowship retreats into the passage and moves towards the exit. Each member flees Cave F with 3 gold and 26 XP. So, we lost Pippin, we lost Boromir, we lost Cock. The Caves of Chaos are brutal for that reason. And oh my God, Trekkie. Did Cock get pierced? I think Cock got actually. I do think Cock got smashed. No, he got stabbed. He got stabbed. So he did get pierced. I guess that would be another way to think it. And then of course a bunch of people make a bunch of similar, locker room humor jokes. I will say that, Gus, aka Gento, says, I'm so confused. This is awesome. So one of the cool things about theater of the mind combat is, remember, you're playing a game that doesn't have the kind of like nitpicky +1 bonuses and +2 bonuses and -2 bonuses that a 5-foot grid based game has. And so when you're playing a theater of the mind game, it really is this kind of confusing and messy. And you know what? It is. It's not this like highly detailed, orchestrated ballet dance like we get with, say, PF2 or Draw Steel or, 5th edition D&D, where you're counting squares and you're moving 5 feet, just to avoid an attack of opportunity, and you're doing this. No, it feels like the scene from Fellowship of the Ring where they're fighting in Moria. It's just crazy, and swords and arrows are swinging overhead. You're not really sure what's going on. All you can kind of do is just focus on the hobgoblin in front of you and raise your shield and do the best that you can. It's kind of chaotic and hectic. And if you don't fully have this like detailed top down, tactical XCOM view of the combat, I think that's a good thing. One of the things that I've been told many times by people when I run them through a theater of the mind style combat using, say, BXD&D or Dungeon World, is they said, I've never felt more present in a combat. And I didn't really feel like I knew what was going on beyond what was right over the edge of my shield. And that's probably accurate. A combat where any single move could be, kill you. We have this detached, sensibility about it, All right. So, by the way, these are the attributes and XP totals currently for the Fellowship. Note that in BXD&D, you get bonus experience points if your ability scores are high enough. Yes, you get, not only do you get high ability scores, which are great because you get bonuses to your AC or your attack rolls or your damage rolls, but you also get bonus XP. So you're just better and you're better. So the way that this guy does it, which is really smart, is he actually just awards that XP in advance. It's functionally the exact same thing. So you get kind of like a, like you get an ante of your XP because of your bonus. So Arwen has 415 XP. Spoiler alert. Gollum has 60 XP. Oh, we also get to see their stats, by the way. Arwen, strength 11, dex 15, constitution 15, intelligence 17, wisdom 9, charisma 10. No. Yes. No. Yes, I think that's right. Gollum, strength 8, dex 13, constitution 7, int 11, wisdom 10, charisma 7. I don't know which order he's doing his stats in. Because usually in basic it goes strength, dex, int, wiz, con, charisma. So I don't actually know. I'm assuming that this is Constitution because he's going like the 3rd edition order. Strider has a 17 Constitution, by the way, a 6 int and a 6 wisdom. Mary has a 13 strength, a 14 dex, a Constitution of 9, an int of 6, a wisdom of 4, and a charisma of 8. Nilfin, the cleric, strength 7, dex 9, con 14, int 10, wisdom 18, charisma 9. Gandalf, note the cleric still can't cast a spell. Gandalf, rocking 843 experience points, still needs almost 1,700 XP in order to level. Frodo has 718 experience points and has no good stats of any sort of note. And Faramir is apparently a new character because he basically starts with 200 XP because he has an insanely rocking strength score of 17, nearly an 18. So I think that's worth the full 10% bonus, I think. Looks like they're going to be going into Cave E, where we're going to have Strider, a thief, Gandalf, a magic user, Frodo, halfling, Nilfin, cleric, Merry, a halfling, Gollum, a new thief, with 2 hit points, by the way. Faramir, Fighter 1, with only 4 hit points. Arwen, with Elf, 8 hit points. And Ball, Hireling Man-at-Arms, with 5 hit points. His erstwhile companion having been slain. But looks like this is a new batch of sessions, so we are going to end it there for tonight. Again, this is just for fun, just to shoot the shit. I'm glad you guys are enjoying this. It's a little fun experience. And again, trust me when I say it gets better. But there's another couple of things I want to talk about. This idea of the funnel and this idea of characters. Number one, there is a certain truth, which is that the cream rises to the top. True story, real story. If you roll a 2 hit point fighter, you're probably not going to survive. What ends up happening is you get a really good character with really good stats. You get a really good hit point roll. And so not only are you more likely to survive because you can take a hit or 2, but also typically the other players kind of recognize you're a good character with good stats. We want you to survive. It's like the scene from the Harry Potter movie. I guess it's from the book too, but I think about the movie, right? Where they're playing chess and Hermione goes, "No, Ron, no." And Harry goes, "What?" He goes, "He's going to sacrifice himself." And then Ron goes, "Because you need to go on, Harry, not me, not Hermione, you need to go on." Right. And so it's kind of the same idea where it's like, if you have a really good character with you rolled 17 strength and a 16 con, and you rolled, an 8 or 9 for your hit point roll, and the party finds, magic armor or magic shield, they're going to be like, "Dude, you take it. Your character, she's badass. She's the one that needs to live on, And so again, that's, there's this idea that you kind of build up this you kind of pour all your resources into the good characters. Additionally, there's this sense of the party continues, right? And somebody said the party of Theseus. And there's a certain element of that, right? Which is that as time goes on, right, the characters that you start with may eventually not even be the characters that you end up with, because as long as the party continues on, and so a sword like Usurper, a +2 sword, may end up actually being a more valuable party asset than a character, right? Because a character could be replaced, but a sword, my God, and so it's an interesting experience. Now, again, it's not for everybody, but also too, again, someone made this comment on Discord. Now, good, you got to know your way around, I guess, 3d6 and straight. But one time I ran BXD&D for Bob, and he said it was one of the best RPG. Now, it was early in his career, but he still says it's one of the best RPG sessions he's ever had. And Smith's character died in the opening round of a combat, and Smith rolled up a new character by the second round of combat. And they were in the woods. It was like a random encounter with some bandits. And Smith's character died, and so he randomly rolled up a dwarf, and he just kind of came charging in on the bandits. And he's like, and after the fight, he's like, "I've been looking for these bandits, and I saw you guys spring your ambush, and I saw your friend get taken out, and I thought this was a great time to ambush them, and so I did." Smith literally made a character, in less than 5 minutes before the second round of the fight. So when you're doing that, now again, is BXD&D ultimate game thing? No, if you want deep character arcs and super meaningful tie-ins between your characters and the backgrounds and story elements and narrative elements, and no, none of that stuff even comes close to working. If I have a problem with D&D, my actual problem is I don't actually think this game is that different from this game. I really do think they're kind of the same game. Yeah, sure, you don't die at 0 hit points, whatever. But these games are much closer than you might think. They really are. Stats, armor class, classes, levels, experience points, attack rolls, misses, hits, roll damage, go to 0, get fucked, yes, you have death's door rules in here and whatever. You just die instantly here. But it's fundamentally the same game. The DNA. But the difference is that this game is being used for, well, all that shit and shenanigans we just saw. But people are trying to use this game to tell these epic, character-driven, narrative story, type games. And I just think that is a fundamental flaw / mistake. I just don't think that is what this game is good at or good for. Somebody said that's what Daggerheart's for, and I would agree. Or any other number of games that we have covered on this channel. So it's one of those weird situations where D&D is still D&D. I mean, again, there's a lot of stuff about 5th edition, obviously, but like I really do consider it to be, not that different from, if basic D&D, is a chimpanzee, then 5th edition D&D is like, an orangutan. It's very close genetically. But people are trying to use these games now for very different things. Some people are trying to use D&D to be this hyper super tactical game, which I don't think it's good at doing that. And some people are trying to use it to be these, Critical Role, Dimension 20, really narrative, pathos, character arc driven games. And I don't think it's good at that either, which is why you have people creating the most absurd rules and crazy fudging and all sorts of just nonsense and horrible advice and blah, 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 blah. And it's really crazy too, because again, if you look at the equipment list in this book and you look at the equipment list in this book, you're going to be like, well, shit, that's like the same equipment stuff. Like, you're like, why is that stuff in this book? You're like, dude, are they expecting that I'm going to use this book to run what we just have been reading? My answer would be maybe the new starter set is Keep on the Borderlands. So, and I would argue, yeah, it works great. I mean, we hacked it to shit, but we played 5th edition. Very hacked to shit, admittedly, but we used 5th edition and I ran this, which was a 5th edition conversion of Keep on the Borderlands. Right? This was released from Goodman Games as part of their original Adventures Reincarnated before they think they got copyright infringement or something. Something came out where they were no longer allowed to print these anymore. But they did a bunch of reprints of these. They did like Isle of Dread. I think they did Lost City. They did they did Temple. Temple of Elemental Evil was a double box set, baby. Double slipcase. Hot fire. Anyways. I think this is the one this is the last one that they came out with recently. This is Caverns of Thracia. Anyways, these are really cool. Now they're like $1 trillion. But anyways, what I was trying to say was that I think D&D 5th edition is a great game for playing in a sort of dungeon type game, with the added benefit that you don't die all the time, which, to be fair, depending on your type and it depends on your mentality, right? Which is very different. Nowadays, people don't like for their characters to die. So D&D 5th edition got rid of that, basically, with death saving throws, right? But other than that, it's really kind of the same game. It really is. So, I mean, sleep, I think, is just as powerful and busted, right? Don't you roll like a bunch of hit dice or hit points and then the monsters just fall asleep? I don't even think they get a saving throw in 5th edition. I could be misremembering my 5th edition. But I mean, like, sleep in 5th edition is closer to sleep from those older editions than it is, say, from 3rd edition sleep. 3rd edition sleep, you think 5.5 has a saving throw? Okay, I'm not familiar with 5.5. I own 5.5, but the only 5th edition I've played is 5.0. And D&D 4th edition is just pure Neanderthals. Yeah, no. D&D 4th edition is a group of like hyper evolved humanoids from the future who came back to gift humanity with the blessings of Utopia, but people were so off put by them that they renounced those gifts from the future, and you know. So, all right, so fine, 5.5 changed it, but my point is that when I read 5th edition, and I still feel this way, maybe 5.5 did change some things, but when I read 5th edition, especially when I read that feats were optional, I know they're not in 5.5, but in 5.0, feats were most definitely optional. In fact, they weren't even an additional thing, right? They were an optional rule that took the place of an ASI, right? The core rule was just you got an ASI. The optional rule was, but if you want, you can swap an ASI for a feat. And so when I looked at 5th edition, I thought, okay, feats are an optional system. A bunch of stuff in the game, it seems like an optional system. Even the combat system was originally going to be an optional system in the way it was being developed through D&D Next. And they ended up kind of making it more core. But I was like, oh, this is like a modernized version where your character has a little bit more of a death protection of BX D&D. And, you know, and then somehow people decided that they wanted to, you know, play these super narrative games with that game. And I said, I don't think it's really good at that. So yeah, I mean, Shinobi says, yeah, my current newbie players are slowly learning that 5e isn't the best for stories, though they enjoy what I include for them, despite the fact that I can't spare a lot of time for narration. Well, it's not even that it's bad for stories. It's just that, there's nothing in the game that connects to, to stories. And I mean, for me, it's like, and a lot of people go, oh, you don't need mechanics to tell stories. And I'm like, okay, but then in that case, what are you using the game system for? So again, I mean, this is going off on a whole, side tangent, but yes, it's true. Although I am led to believe that like, there's a lot of that stuff in the DMG. Maybe not like Treasure for XP, but I've been told that the 5e DMG actually has quite a bit of extra tech in it. But yes, Cal, I agree with Cal. I think fundamentally, 5e D&D is a dungeon crawler, and just nobody uses it that way at all, for sure. Yes, and to be clear, I am fine with XP for gold, because XP for gold is really milestone experience. And when I say milestone experience, I don't mean the bullshit the GM just decides when you level up. I think that is the worst form of experience point leveling up gain that has ever been created by anyone ever. I think that's terrible. When I say milestone based experience, I mean legit milestone. Like, hey, when you reach the Elven City, you guys will level up. When you guys save the prince, you'll level up. Those are fine. You're telling the players in advance, hey, when you achieve this goal that you care about, you will be rewarded with experience points and or a level. Well, believe it or not, XP for gold is the same thing. That you're being a little bit more discreet with it. You're not doling out the XP a little bit at a time. But the premise back then was that the only thing that characters cared about was gold and treasure. And so essentially it was a milestone based experience points, but the milestones were get treasure. But if you replace that system with anything else, an adventure goal, rescue the prince, any type of thing, it's basically the same thing. I have absolutely no problem with that form of XP because you're giving the players a goal. That goal theoretically is aligned with what the players care about. Now, back in 1970s and 1980s, players weren't interested in the game was about getting cool treasure and finding cool magical items and exploring the dungeon, and obviously the game highly evolved, if you want to call it that. But it was really Dragonlance that sort of took RPGs and sort of made them more about hitting story beats more than anything. My main thing with a milestone, though, for me, needs to be the players need to know what they have to do to get a level. That, for me, is the most important thing, because that is what's going to drive their behavior. That's what's so important. You need to let people know what you're rewarding, because what gets rewarded gets repeated. If you want to encourage behavior, you need to let your players know what kind of stuff you're rewarding. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, there you go. XP milestones is the number of caves explored. That's neat, right? The game is saying, hey, go explore caves. If you explore caves, you'll get XP. You get XP, you level up. You want to level up, cool. Neat. I actually own that, I think. Yeah, I just haven't gone through it. Yeah. So again, Shinobi, you do you. I will simply say I think that is not good. Simply because you aren't giving your players agency, right? You're not giving them agency. So ask yourself, what kind of behavior are you encouraging from an agency standpoint with that? So maybe it's not that it's a bad thing, but I feel like you potentially are leaving something on the table. You're not allowing your players to sort of control or drive their own destiny, you know? So. I see. You're not, that's just what you do in D&D. Fair enough. Now again, there's no right or wrong answer. I just think that there are methods to this madness, And again, for me, I want my players to be in the driver's seat. That's where you run into problems, right? Which is that a lot of people, now it's interesting that you say that, Ray Tales. So this is why I think it's interesting, okay? Because again, you have to understand, what are you encouraging? What are you rewarding? Now there is a game system, which I like, called Legend of the Five Rings. And you get 1 XP per hour of playing the game. Full stop. That's it. So if you play a 5-hour session, you get 5 XP. Now, in that session, you could duel a samurai, you could fight a gigantic battle against the demons of the Shadowlands, or you could sit around a tea house and talk about honor, and you would get 5 XP. That game is being very distinct and very deliberate in doing that, because what it is trying to reward you is it wants you to sit around and talk about tea or talk about honor. That game, the way its XP system is situated. Now, I'm not saying that I necessarily love this, but it does have a method to its madness. And the methods to its madness is that game is a samurai simulator. It just wants you to live the life of a samurai. And in that game's idea, of a party spends the entire session, 5 hours, sitting around the tea house, discussing honor and, the machinations of the Crane clan. That is just as living in the skin of a samurai as battling an epic confrontation or saving the day. So that game, in that game's mindset, you aren't getting rewarded for doing anything. You are getting rewarded for just pretending to be a samurai. And because of that, that game can encourage players, rightfully so. They know that they don't have to go do the big heroic thing to level up, because that game's not about doing the big, cool, heroic thing. That game is just about like being in the skin of a samurai. And by rewarding you for just playing the samurai, the player might go, wait a second. So if I spend the entire session and we were just, talking about honor, I got just as rewarded as if we had gone out and fought a bunch of battles for our honor. And the GM goes, huh, yeah, that's true. And the player goes, oh, right. Because there might be a lot of people who go, hey, what did we do that session? And you're like, oh, we just shot the shit And the GM goes, well, you didn't accomplish any key milestones, or you didn't do this, or you didn't do that, so I'm not going to award you any XP. So the players go, oh, okay. So doing that is being disincentivized. But Legend of the Five Rings also isn't trying to say like, but did I challenge the players? Did they overcome some difficult obstacle and now I'm rewarding them? No, the reward is just pretend to be a samurai, and the game is good with rewarding you for that. So that is a very, 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 very distinct and very, very different kind of reward benefit that may not necessarily be what you want in your fantasy adventure game. Now, some people might want that in their fantasy adventure game, but yeah. Now I'm talking strictly, Pumpkin, about gaining XP. If your character, doesn't defend their honor, there might be a mechanical consequence, which is your honor score drops, right? Your glory score could drop. Your daimyo may not choose you for the choice arranged marriage, which would be a great shame to your mother and father. But, in terms of pure XP, in terms of pure mechanical progression, okay, in that game system, if we sat down and we played 20 sessions of Legend of the Five Rings at 5 hours a session, if all we did was, write haikus and do ikebana flower arrangement and discuss the meta top physics of the kami and whether or not we should pay more attention to our ancestors or to the living honor of ourselves, if all we did that for 20 sessions, those characters would have 100 XP and have unlocked super muso technique samurai katanas on fire, void, harnessing the void / Meanwhile, the other campaign where you're fighting goblins and oni and you're holding the shadow wall against the forces of the dark demon god Fu Leng, and you're dueling against a dishonorable samurai who have betrayed your clan, and you're fighting tooth and nail for every inch. And 20 sessions, you're the same 100 XP. So when you put those two things next to each other, you're like, you might think, oh, that's a terrible incentive, and you would be right if Legend of the Five Rings cared about that, but it doesn't. It just cares about, are you being a samurai? And in Legend of the Five Rings mindset, spending your time writing haikus and doing ikebana flower arrangement is just as valid of a samurai activity as is battling demons at the Shadow Wall or the Caillou Wall, right? So again, it's not. I'm not saying that that's superior. I'm just saying it is doing something very distinct, and it's doing something very specific. But anyways, maybe. Again, if you feel like you want to encourage a certain type of behavior or progression, that's why I said you have to be very careful with your XP and progression systems, because you really do set the tone for how your players are going to react, whether you really understand that or not. So. Anyways, this was fun. And, I know we did this yesterday and, we didn't get a lot of people, but we got a lot of people today. Trekkie dropped a ton of super chats, so I really appreciate that. Cal, as well. And then, Klopster and Scotty both kicked us off with a really nice, bunch of tips. So it was kind of nice, for a little bit, fun element there. But, we will eventually get back to Stone Top. Again, it's just kind of a weird week. Just cause I may be out of town, and, there was some other stuff in terms of my racquetball schedule, but yeah, should be good times. Stone Top will continue. I still got to talk to these Diablo people and see if they want me to review their game. Well, they asked me to review their game, but I don't know if they actually want to pay me, or they just hey, do our game for free for us because you're cool. Let's see here. I did get paid by Rebellion for doing the Tunnels and Troll, so that was cool. The check finally came in. That was sweet. Let's see here. We got a new VTT somebody wants us to take a look at. Dungeons Deep. Sounds like it might be like an AI thing. Anyways, I mean, here's the thing with Diablo. Obviously, I think Diablo 3 and Diablo 4 were shit. But, you know, Diablo 2 and Diablo 1, those games were before, you know, 2008. So that means that I played them back when I played video games all the time. And I absolutely love Diablo. And I think the world and the tone and the style of the game was very, you know, awesome. Diablo 4 became just, I mean, I know Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 had loot. But, like, the focus and the way that the game became, like, this, like, loot, so overly loot focused. I just hated what it became. So, and just the nature of the game, it just became too it became too comic booky and superhero-y, and any of the, like, the horror element of the game just got completely shit on. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with Sanctuary, right? And what they do with the world and the style and the tone of the RPG. Like, are they going to do, you know, more of that sort of, you know, kind of biblical horror, you know, demonic invasion, incursion style game, desperately fighting, you know, back the hordes of hell? Or is it going to be more like, you know, harvesting the cow level? You know, that's kind of what, you know, what I'm getting at. So, but again, I'm curious to see what they said, or what they will say. They said, yeah, it's coming in September, the Kickstarter. Somebody said that apparently they talked about doing a Kickstarter before, and then they just never launched the Kickstarter, but whatever. They want us to take a look at the quick start, so I do need to message them. So they messaged me like over a week ago, but I mean, it looks cool. Anyways, let's take a look at the pre-launch page. I mean, it has 10,700 followers already on the pre-launch page, so seems pretty good here. D6 Cobb dice pool system led by Joe LaFavi and Glass Cannon Prismat. Oh, that's a tough name for me. Prismaslav Zub, who did Dying Light. I don't know Dying Light. Working alongside Cam Banks, who did Marvel Heroic Playings. I mean, look, I don't want to shit on Cam Banks, but I really don't like Cortex, and I really don't like Marvel Heroic Role Playing. So sorry, Cam Banks. John Harper, Sean Tompkin, Mike Olson. Those are all good names. So, I mean, granted, those are kind of like those are like supporting designers. I don't know if they're like the main designers, but it's a custom D6 system, pool system. So at least it's not just 5ED20. Let's see what it says here. It says, take up the mantle as classic classes like barbarians, druids, necromancers, rogues, and sorcerers. Plunge into dungeons and revel in legendary gear, gold, and glory. Dark fantasy, persevere through merciless foes, relentless stakes, and unspeakable horrors. Cinematic action, hack and slash through endless mobs in fast-paced tactical combat where story, stats, and synergies hold sway. Heroes from Session 1. No inexperienced Squishel level 1. Begin as a fully equipped and seasoned hero, ready to live the epic level dream of TTRPGs from Session 0. That's an interesting concept. So it's not 0 to hero. It just sounds like you start as a hero, but I don't know if that means like, oh, you start with 20 HP instead of 2 or something. But there's some sort of morality system. The eternal conflict seizes every chance to tempt and test you with your push the luck mechanic after your very soul. That sounds cool. And then fully immersive world with Sanctuary, and we have official support. I mean, it seems kind of cool. Boy, it's a great way to think about it, Pumpkin. Actually, I'm going to go to my green screen. That's a great way to think about it, Pumpkin. You know, is the surge in all this IP, you know, are we in a bubble? Because all of these people are just like, hey, if you just slap an RPG on an IP that people love, you're going to make 5 million or whatever, you know, 10 million or whatever. Could be. I mean, you reach a certain point, right, where people just stop buying this stuff, but I don't know. I mean, again, I'm just as guilty, of acquiring RPGs, that I don't get to the table as anybody else, clearly. But, I at least can say I've played most of these games behind me. You think it's still Fallout from that far back? Also, if you're talking about OGL, that was 2023. But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. It'll be really interesting to find out what happens. So, in the meantime, I gotta get some Daggerheart and Avatar and Blaze in the Dark games kicked off. I will admit I'm a little nervous about Daggerheart and Avatar because I've actually run 2 Blades in the Dark campaigns remotely before on Roll20. And if the Foundry implementation of Blades in the Dark sucks, I know the Roll20 one is really good. Or at least it worked very well for me. So I am going to have no problem running. And I ran Torchbearer on Roll20 when I did the 2 campaigns last year because it had a much better implementation than the really under. In fact, I paid money to have a Foundry updated for Torchbearer, and then Foundry updated, and everything we did kind of worked out. Didn't work out. Anyways, so Blaze of the Dark I've run before, and I know that the system is really good on Roll20. I do not know about Daggerheart, or Avatar. Now with Daggerheart, again, it's coming to Alchemy. They've got this really cool thing that they're doing and promoting, and I want to try to push that. Obviously, we looked at Foundryborn, right? We did a whole stream about Foundryborn. It seemed like a very robust, complete system. My concern with Foundry is how much Foundry ties to token actors rather than or actor entities rather than basically. I feel like Foundry is really designed for the battle mat. And I don't necessarily know that I even want to use things like range in my Daggerheart game, which is to say, to make it more theater of the mind-esque. But again, my experience with Foundry I am not a Foundry veteran by any stretch of the imagination, but I have not really played around deeply with Foundryborn. Like I imagine that if you're playing Foundryborn the way that like Daggerheart is supposed to be played with moving little tokens around and stuff, it would work fine. Yes, but Blaze in the Dark doesn't have a concept like range, right? So again, I don't know how. Sometimes, believe it or not, when some systems are too integrated, okay, when they're too integrated, it actually becomes more of a problem for me. Because they're like trying to do too much for you. They're trying to help you out too much. And then it just doesn't work. And I'm like, I get annoyed. So anyways, I have to do some messing around. And my understanding is that Alchemy, I've messed around with it a little bit, but ironically, Alchemy was supposed to be a really like a micro light VTT. But apparently when somebody was telling me that all of their patch updates over the last year or 2 years, Alchemy has just been trying to become a more fully fledged VTT because that's what the other people want, No, I mean like not caring about the ranges, like just like me as a GM eyeballing it and not like worrying about like, I'll just tell you like, oh, you can totally hit them with your fireball. Yeah. You're like, rather than like worrying about like, are they within far range or very far range or near range or close range or near close range? Daggerheart has about like not too many. It has like too many ranges, like as I recall. I think it has like 6 ranges, which is way too much. The whole like we need something for reach weapons is like the bane of like every RPG ever. But anyways, because again, I don't really care about keeping track of ranges. Or like I don't know how integrated the spotlight system is. I will be really annoyed. Again, I have no idea. I'm just spitballing here. These are my concerns. I will be really annoyed if like it has some sort of built-in spotlight management system that expects you to run it like Daggerheart. That is not a plus for me. That is a penalty for me because that's not how I run PBTA style games that don't have a defined initiative. I also actively think Daggerheart's spotlight system, as defined by the game, is bad. So, okay. That is going to do it for me for tonight. I may be back tomorrow. I may be back Friday. It depends on whether or not I go to this concert on Friday. I just, I hate people and leaving my house, and it's like 2 hours away, but it's a really cool band. So I kind of want to go, but also not. We'll see. And I'm supposed to somehow try to play a ARCS game with Bob and Trevor before NightCon so they can learn how to play. A lot of stuff to do. Plus games to launch, games to run, Moria to kick off. Lots of stuff to do. But we'll be back with more Stone Top, with more GM advice, with more actual plays, more just shooting the shit, more talking about RPGs, more first looks, of course. Pico is pretty much right there on the next item to do after Stone Top. We just had a really, really crazy Stone Top support, so we're going to be doing that for a little while. And yeah, we'll see you next time on Knights of Last Call. Appreciate you all. See you on the Patreon Discord.